Hayes, thank you so much for doing this. Maybe piggyback off that. What's been your read on Austin Matthews as captain thus far?
Honestly, I don't think he's really changed at all, guys. I guess you got to give him credit because that's what he said was going to happen. At the introductory press conference in August, he said, "It doesn't change anything for me. I'm going to continue to be the same guy I always have been." And I think that's been pretty consistent, that he speaks the same way, he conducts himself the same way, he plays the same way. And I guess that should be expected. He's 9 years into the league. He is who he is. In terms of his media interactions, he's never been overly comfortable, and I didn't expect that to change now that he's got the captaincy. But really, I mean, the evaluation of whether or not this was the right choice, whether or not it's going to have any tangible effect on how they actually play, is going to come in the playoffs, right? I mean, that's when they really have to gear up. That's when they really have to basically prove their worth in terms of everything across the board and all the support that they've been granted from the organization for years. They've got to repay in the playoffs. And I would say the same thing applies with the fans, right? That's what they're looking for. Show up come playoff time, go on a run, be a dog, be an alpha. And if he does that, then I think that's probably when we'll really be able to evaluate the whole captaincy stuff. But Matthews is who he is. He's comfortable with who he is. I guess I wasn't expecting much of a change. And honestly, I don't think I've seen much. I don't think the captaincy has really affected him whatsoever.
Yeah, I think that's yet to be seen for sure. Hazy, we were talking before you got here, Mitch Marner taking a maintenance day and, Matthews having some injuries with this Four Nations coming up. Do you think a team, if they're seeing a guy might need some time or he's banged up, obviously the owners and the GMs and everyone would prefer to give these guys some rest and not risk them going. With the Toronto Maple Leafs having 3 guys going and the centerpiece of their team, if someone were borderline, do you think the team has the ability to shut that guy down from the Four Nations, or how do you see that going?
I don't think so. I don't get that impression, right? And I don't think the Leafs would be comfortable doing that, again, based on the way they've handled these guys for years. They've treated them like kings. They've made them very, very comfortable. Everything's first class across the board, on the ice, off the ice, in the negotiating room. The Leafs have done everything they can to prop up these players and make sure that Matthews and Marner and Nylander are comfortable and feel like they have their own identity. And I think it likely applies here with the Four Nations. I think they'd be within their rights, the Maple Leafs, to express their opinion for sure. They're paying these guys a fortune. It's complicated because it's a league-sanctioned event, right? Like it is a scenario where the NHL and the PA, they're trying to make money here. It is somewhat of a money grab, I guess, and you want your best players there to make sure that it looks and feels legit. So I'm sure they'd have the conversation, but I think it's ultimately up to the players, and I think that's what's happened with Matthews. And to his credit, he's looked like himself the last month and a half, right? Ever since he returned from the last, injury break, the guy has looked very good. He's looked very comfortable, and he's comfortable with how he feels, and he's going to go. And the same thing will apply, I'm sure, with Mitch Marner and Willie. And I empathize for these guys and guys within their generation because they've never had the opportunity to play a best-on-best tournament. Yeah. And this is not going to be the Olympics. It's not going to be an old-school Canada Cup. I'm skeptical what it's really going to look like and feel like in terms of intensity and in terms of, whether the rivalries are actually going to be there when they arrive at the Four Nations face-off. But these guys want to play for their countries. I think there's a business element to it as well, right? They've all got endorsements. They all represent different companies, and this is a big platform for that. So I would think Shanahan, Tree Living, Berube, they might express their opinion, but ultimately they're gonna leave it up to the players, and the players are gonna make that call. And if the players feel like they can play and they can show up, then they're gonna show up. And I think we're gonna see that with other guys throughout the league, like the Pietrangelo thing. That to me that feels like the exception to the rule, I guess. Like my understanding is guys like Linus Ullmark, who still hasn't played. He's working in his Sweden equipment. During practice, the guy, I think he's still going to go. Guy hasn't played in weeks. And I get the impression like a lot of guys are going to try to get there. So I guess to answer your question, no, I think the Leafs can express their opinion. If it's really bad, they may really put their foot down, but maintenance days or, hey, a little bit banged up or bangs and bruises, that's not going to stop these guys. And the players are going to make that decision. And I would fully expect Matthews, Marner, Nylander, they're going to be there and they're going to be ready to play.
How much stock you put in this thing, Hayes? I'm always careful how I phrase this question, but of the 3 players of the Maple Leafs going, does it matter what they do? Like Mitch Marner, for example, does it matter if he rips it up in this tourney at all?
In terms of like projecting what's going to happen come playoff time, I don't think so. Right. Like, I think if all three of them have a phenomenal tournament, and I guess it's not possible for all three of them too, because, at least one of them is not going to make it to the finals. So I guess it couldn't really apply to all three. I don't know if there's a downside, right? I don't think there's a downside in going there and looking comfortable. And if the intensity is high, if it gets to that point, if you get US versus Canada in the final and it's a great game, high intensity, high energy, physical, it kind of has a playoff feel to it. And Marner and or Matthews end up kind of elevating their play and look comfortable in that. I guess that there's no downside in that for sure. There definitely wouldn't be, but I don't think anyone's going to walk away. And I don't think it only applies to the Leaf players and their evaluation. I don't think anyone's going to walk away from this tournament and say, okay, now I know what's going to happen, in April in the Stanley Cup playoffs. It's a totally different beast. I'm hoping for intensity. I'd love for the tournament to be great. I've been starved for best on best like everyone else. I'm not holding my breath though. I'm really not. And I think there's a chance the group stage is just, they kind of wade into it. Maybe that finals is great, but it could be Sweden versus Finland in the final, right? There's no guarantee Canada and the US are even going to get there. So I'm not going to take a 3 or 4 game tournament in February that's manufactured and apply it one way or the other. And that applies the other way too, right? To be clear here, if Marner, Willie, Matthews show up and they're awful, or they don't look like themselves, that doesn't set off bells and alarms for me that, we're the Leafs are doomed come playoff time. I don't think that's fair to the players. And I don't think this tournament means enough.
Yeah, speaking of the Leafs specifically, what do you think as March 7th, the trade deadline here creeps up on us? What do you think their priority is coming down the stretch toward the deadline?
Well, I mean, everyone seems to be committed to this third line center, right? Like everyone's just bought into that hook, line, and sinker. And I can understand why. I mean, Domi, we'll see if Marner plays tonight. And if Domi ends up moving to the wing, I think that's inevitable. It has to happen. We're deeper into the season, I believe, than we were last year when Max moved to the wing. But I don't think Max is going to be like a full-time center come playoff time. So they're going to have to figure that out. But there's also a scenario here where they have to figure out who is in the lineup come opening night of the playoffs. Like, what is Max Pacioretty, right? Like, what is he? What is Connor Dewar? What is he going to be? Is Reeves going to play based on who you play in the first round? These are all decisions that have to be hashed out, I think, by the coaching staff before they even come up with a plan for the trade deadline. But I understand, the focus on center help. I think that is important. I don't think Pontus Holmberg can be playing playoff games for you up the middle of the ice. I think David Camp is likely going to be their fourth line center. So, there's all those names that I'm sure you guys have talked about. We've talked about that maybe they kick tires on. But I still think they got to figure out who's playing with Morgan Riley. And I don't know if they have that answer determined right now, or if that answer is here internally. I mean, I think they envisioned, in a perfect world scenario, Oliver Ekman-Larsson playing with Yanni Hakanpää in the third pairing. That's not going to happen because Hakanpää is not going to play. I mean, that ship has sailed. You just got to move off that. But I think Ekman-Larsson in your third pair is more ideal. That's what Cup teams have done in the past. That's what he was in Florida. He was on the third pairing with Kulikov, I believe it was. And generally, it's big veteran defenseman. You try to load up a third pairing so you feel okay in that scenario. Tanev and McCabe are going to be a pair. That's got to be your number one, and they're going to play a ton of minutes. Who is Morgan Riley playing with? It can't be Philippe Myers. It can't be Connor Timmins. I don't think Simone Benoit is capable of playing 20-plus minutes in the playoffs. So they got to figure that out. And it's deja vu. We go through this every single year. Who's he going to play with? And I don't know how many assets they have. I don't know how many they're comfortable with moving off of. These are all, questions that we ask every single trade deadline, and it's on Tree Living and Company to figure that out. But I think that's a serious question right now. I think third line center, like they've said, and who's playing with Morgan Riley? And if you have the answer internally, you better figure that out. Is it going to be Ekman-Larsson? Are you comfortable with that? Can the two of them be on the ice against, number one lines in a big playoff game on the road? I don't know. I wouldn't feel overly comfortable with that. So I would assume Craig Berube and company probably wouldn't either. So it's kind of like deja vu, dude. We got to figure this out. Who's playing with Morgan Riley between now and March 7th?
Yeah, and I think it's deja vu all over the board in terms of the questions we have surrounding this team. Like, bottom line, the bottom six scares the shit out of me, Hayes. Like, they're so top heavy. It's the same convo every year. And again, it gets back to the conversation. Like, are they really going to bring back the core four? And I thought you had a great sort of take on Friday. The salary cap is going up. We talked about this yesterday. If there's a team that could benefit greatly from this cap going up, I think it is the Toronto Maple Leafs. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely, man. They got a lot of flexibility. Like they're basically they're committed to Matthews, Nylander, McCabe, and Tanev, effectively. And there are other guys that they have signed to some term that I think you can move off pretty easily if you want to. But for the most part, that's the core they're committed to, right? They're committed to 4 veterans, 2 forwards, 2 defensemen, and you've got the goalies on term as well. Joseph Wall, they've got him for 3 years after this. Stolarz for another year. So you think you're pretty comfortable in net, you're pretty comfortable up front, and you're pretty comfortable on the back end. Obviously, Morgan Riley's another guy that I guess you have to throw in there in terms of term and how much money he's making. But yeah, I think with the deal, with the cap numbers going up, you can weaponize cap space. And this has been something that the NHL just has not embraced the way other leagues have. I think the NFL in particular, the NFL is always ahead of this, weaponizing cap space, moving off guys before you think they should because they see maybe the wheels falling off or they see better opportunities out there. And I get that it's uncomfortable. I understand that there's a lot of comfort in keeping the guys and the guys continuously bringing what they bring. And that is jersey sales, ticket sales in the playoffs every year. That's what this core 4 is represented. You've got to give them credit for that. Like, they are very predictable. They're very comfortable in the regular season. What has happened is they fall short in the playoffs every single year. And for me, it's very simple. Like, I should clarify before I start this. I would guess the Leafs probably end up just giving the money to Marner, probably end up paying Tavares, and probably bringing them back. That would be my guess based on history, right? History would suggest that's the way Shanahan operates, and regardless of who the GM is, that's how the GM's going to operate as well. They're going to give in to the players. They're going to pay them whatever they have to pay. They're going to give them the term that they're comfortable with taking, and they're going to bring those guys back. So as of today, that would be my guess of what happens in the future. If I'm running the show, I'm waiting until the playoffs play out, because if they play out the same way they've played out for years, then I think it opens the door, and it should open the door to pretty substantial change, but also the ability to really remold your team over the next 18 months. And maybe you let Tavares walk. Maybe you let Marner walk. Maybe you contemplate the idea of moving off Morgan Riley. That's a lot of money, a lot of flexibility. With the cap exponentially going up every single year, there's a ton of options. And I get it's scary. I get it. I understand where Leaf fans come from. They're like, well, who are you going to get? Maybe that guy's worse. Maybe it's not going to work out. It might not. But if they have shown you for a 9th straight year they can't win in the playoffs, how much more do you possibly need to see? And at what point does it become, okay, I've done the superstar thing, I want the team winning thing? Like that appetite, I think, continues to grow among Leaf fans. And I think it will only grow and grow if, again, it doesn't go well for them in the
Snipe.
We'll try to reconnect with Hayes. He's on fire there too. So we got you back?
You're out. Sorry, guys. My phone's ringing here, and I don't even know who that guy is. I flushed him, so sorry about
Go
that.
ahead. All good. Go ahead.
I hear what you're saying, Hazy. The only thing we do know is what they've done in the past. And the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over again, expecting different results. But back to this year, and on something of the last from me, Kelly Yarncroke's a guy that's flown under the radar, been injured. People kind of forget about him. Do you think when he comes back, as we think he's starting to approach that timeline, he can be a difference maker in this bottom 6?
I'm not sure. Like, difference maker, I'm not sure. I mean, like Nick said, man, the bottom 6, it's tough to define any of them as difference makers. And you need it. Like, you need to put together at least one line. And Berube said that when he arrived, right? He wanted some identity on that third line. Like, he wanted something he could patch together where he knows what he's going to get, and he knows that they could have some sort of an impact on the game, and make the other coaching staff circle them and say, okay, we got to figure these guys out. I don't know what that combination is, and I'm not sure Calle Yarncroke necessarily helps it.
Make sure to check out more of our content right here on the Leafs Nation YouTube page. We got long form interviews, we got clips, we got epic rants by Jay Rosehill. We simply have it all. And don't forget, you can find out much more at theleafsnation.com. Thanks so much for watching.